This week, Israel was on the receiving end of some very harsh words from Canada, Britain, and France. What they don't understand is they're not only wrong, but they're counterproductive. They're giving inadvertent support to Hamas.
Was Israel's decision to renew humanitarian aid into Gaza a good one? And is Israel preparing to bomb Iran? Stay tuned to find out.
Shalom and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev, and as per usual, I'm here with my co-host, Ruthie Blum.
Hi, Mark. It's good to be here. I would like to, before we start, I would like to request of our viewers that if they're happy with the content, that they please subscribe to our channel, like the content and subscribe. But also I would like to point out that though it is true we do receive lots of comments on our YouTube channel, we are now starting an email address. We have an email address so viewers can write us with questions or suggestions about topics they'd like us to cover in the following week. Criticisms are totally welcome as long as it's not hate mail. We do not respond to hate mail. Criticism is fine. The email address is undiplomatic@jns.org.
Can I say that again? Undiplomatic@jns.org.
That's it. Okay, so let's get right to our topics, the first of which is our quote-unquote friends, with friends like those who needs enemies, France, the UK, and Canada. Why don't you explain what I mean about that?
So all these countries, in a joint statement, put out a policy, said that they were very critical of Israeli behavior. They pointed to two matters. They're very unhappy with Israel's attitude towards humanitarian aid going into Gaza, and they're very unhappy with Israel's military operation taking place as we speak in the Gaza Strip against Hamas. And they threatened actions. And we've already had actions from Britain. I'm not sure yet we've had them from Canada, though maybe from the EU. We'll see what happens there, where France is obviously a player. But the British have suspended talks on a new trade agreement. Now, we've got an existing trade agreement with Britain, but there was talk of, and I know this from firsthand, there was talk of negotiations to make a new trade agreement, and all that's been suspended. And so Israel's so-called best friends after the United States, we have no one like the United States, but our best friends, the British, the Canadians, the French, have all now come about against Israel, very critical of our behavior, threatening to take steps. The word, of course, is, are they going to sanction Israel or something like that? Heaven forbid. And of course, the argument is, if your friends are saying this, you must be doing something wrong. That is the argument. Did I summarize that correctly, Ruthie?
You did, but though I will say you were pretty mild about the way you described it, only in the sense that you said, they're unhappy with. This was a harsh condemnation, so let's be clear about that. But another thing is that, first of all, it's not that, we heard Foreign Secretary David Lammy in Parliament, I think
British
it was yesterday,
Foreign Secretary.
British Foreign Secretary David Lammy, screaming practically at the top of his lungs. The Brits don't like that, but he was like hysterical about Israel and that there were starving children in Gaza. He was just hysterical. Now, let me say that it is important to point out that it is not Britain, France, and Canada. It is their left-wing leaders, okay? Countries that do not have left-wing leaders and the oppositions in those countries are not on that page. I'm sorry, there goes the left all over again, doing that disgusting thing. But I have to say, it's not any better than far-left Israelis.
Can I correct you? I think they are wrong, and we'll discuss why in a moment. We'll go into why they're wrong, both on the facts, and they're also wrong from a policy point of view. But I don't think you can call Mr. Carney in Canada or Macron on the left. These are centrist politicians. Hang on, let me finish my point before you decide to argue with me. Not everyone who's anti-Israel or come out with an anti-Israel statement is on the left. Unfortunately, We had trouble with some conservative governments. When you and me worked for the Prime Minister, way back then, there was a British leader called Mr. Cameron, who was the Foreign Secretary at the time, at the beginning of the war, and he put out statements we didn't like, and he was speaking for the Conservative government. And so I think it's overly, without wanting to offend anyone, it's overly simplistic to say all the criticism only comes from the far left. Macron has got a far left in Parliament, Mochelon and his group of people who are terrible, right? They're much worse than Macron is, right? But I think just to taint them all with the same brush is a mistake.
Okay, fine. You're right. It was a broad generalization, but it's nothing compared to their appalling generalizations, lies about Gaza, about Israeli behavior. Israel abides by international law. Israel is at war against these barbarians. Britain, France, and Canada should not only be defending Israel, and not because they're our allies, not because it's the Jewish state. They should be defending Israel because those jihadis in Gaza are the same ones that are taking over their countries. And if they think that they're going to be free of an October 7th massacre in their own countries, they're mistaken. So kowtowing to that part of their electorate is just disgusting. They should be battling. They should be with Israel in a battle against these jihadists who are warring against the West. Right now, yes, Israel, we happen to be on the front lines. How dare they talk to us like that?
So I don't know enough about Canada, except know that Mr. Carney was just elected and he will be Prime Minister, I think, for the next 4 years, unless something happens. We know Macron is in the tail end of his time as President of France. We don't know who will come after him. It could get worse. It could get better. With Britain, I have more experience because, as you know, I served in the last part of the previous decade, from 2016 to 2020. I was Israel's ambassador there. And when I was there, the whole big issue was Corbyn and the Labour Party. And Corbyn was accused by many of actually not just being anti-Israel, but being anti-Semitic.
Wasn't just accused. He was an open anti-Semite.
And Keir Starmer has come to power saying he's the non-Corbyn. That's how he got elected. I have removed that sort of legacy from the party and so forth. But these sort of very shrill, unbalanced, anti-Israel statements, I mean, I would have expected more. I would have hoped for better from this government. Israel in the past had friends in Britain from the Labour Party. There was Prime Minister Tony Blair, who was pretty friendly. There was Gordon Brown, who was pretty friendly. No, they weren't. Yeah, I'm saying everything's relative, yes?
You're talking about a past that seems not to exist anymore. The old-style Labour parties, like the old Democrats in America, long gone, honey. Okay, not since Harper in Canada have we had a totally pro-Israel government. But I wasn't even talking about pro-Israel, okay? And Corbyn, he was accused of being an anti-Semite. He is an anti-Semite. And being the non-Corbyn candidate, well, that is a low bar, okay?
Agreed.
What I will say is that I'm extremely proud of Prime Minister Netanyahu for coming right out and blasting them for condemning Israel's moves in Gaza, which have been more humane than any other army fighting for its life.
In a populated, built-up area.
Exactly.
In fact, when you compare the behavior of the IDF to other Western democratic countries who've been forced to fight in built-up urban areas, actually Israel comes out very well by comparison.
It does. And also, you know something? Here's the thing. It is a terrible tragedy that we have to fight these barbarians hiding behind civilians, hiding in tunnels. And while we are abiding by all international laws, our enemies do not. They continue to not only, they whine about their children, or they complain that we're starving their children. What they're doing is teaching their children to use Kalashnikovs and kill Jews. So, and anybody in the West who doesn't realize that this is not a localized conflict.
But can I ask a question? I want to ask you something. Earlier this week, Prime Minister Netanyahu took a decision to reallow into Gaza humanitarian aid. And you have to tell me if you support that decision or not. I support the decision. And I Obviously, there are limitations, but he reopened the truck, started going in earlier this week. My question is the following. Had he taken that decision a week earlier, would those decisions coming out of London and Ottawa and Paris, would they maybe have been less shrill? Would
Nope.
they have been not have happened? I
Nope.
don't know. No, I don't know that. Well, Netanyahu said in his justification for allowing aid into Gaza, he said, the international community will only allow us to pursue our goal of destroying Hamas and winning this war if we do this sort of thing. That's Netanyahu's words. And so my question is, had we done it a week earlier, I'm not saying they wouldn't have criticized us, but could it have been at a different level of volume, a different level of harshness?
First of all, it's not exactly how Netanyahu put it,
Okay.
that the international community won't give us legitimacy. What he said was, we're helping, again, I'm paraphrasing too, but the gist of his words was, we're going to do this differently now. The reason we withheld aid had to do with the fact that Hamas was stealing it and selling it, and also it was prolonging the war, and it was prolonging our ability to. It was postponing our ability to free the hostages. But he said, this now is going to be completely different. We're going to have soldiers monitoring, vetting the civilians who are allowed to get the food, and the food will be distributed differently. It'll be more like a soup kitchen than tons of dry supplies that Hamas can hoard and sell to the population. But what he said was, look, I need to do this also because we have friends, and I think he said this in Washington, who said, look, it's not that you're violating any laws, but it would help if it, for the optics, basically. Now, you asked, if he'd done this a week earlier, would it have helped? And I say no. And why do I say now? No, because right now, the lies from Europe that are coming out, not only on social media, but on interviews I do with European television and radio channels, and what they were saying was completely false about all the aid all the time. And the UN is continuing to lie, even during the time that tons of trucks were going in there. The thing is, so you asked me, one second, I just want to answer your question. You asked me, am I in favor of it? I'm of two minds, okay? I think both sides are right. I'm not in favor of letting any humanitarian aid into Gaza on the one hand, because the hostages are not getting any of it. And the Red Cross still, that is in Gaza, is still not visiting them. All right, that's one thing. However, yes, I know that I'm not sitting at the table where our security cabinet has to make these decisions. And if Netanyahu and other ministers, very far-right ministers, other than with the exception of one, understood the reasoning behind it, then I can live with that.
So I want to say something. Obviously, you and me and many of our viewers know that the UN is a biased anti-Israel organization, and that the aid mechanisms of the UN in Gaza have been infiltrated and taken over by Hamas. Okay, we know that. One of our problems in Europe and places like Canada is that unfortunately the UN has this role as this humanitarian, apolitical organization who's out there to help hungry children get their food. And that's not understood. And we in Israel look at all these UN reports and we say, not another one. And they're all very biased and they've got no objectivity at all. And that their organizations, they're responding to what they're hearing from the Hamas people in their organizations in Gaza. We both know that. The trouble is, across the world, and especially in Europe at places like Canada, the UN, it's like if they say something, it must be true. The UN says that Gaza is on the edge of starvation. These UN so-called humanitarian organizations say Gaza's children are on the edge of starvation. People take it very seriously, wrongly. But that's one of the key cards that Hamas has to play. It's the UN card, mobilizing the UN, saying there's a humanitarian crisis. And of course, it's never Hamas's fault. What does the UN say? And then France and Britain and Canada, it's Israel's fault.
It's interesting because the UN a couple of months ago released a report saying actually it wasn't true. There's famine in Gaza, and there was a whole thing about how many calories per person were entering there. Interesting. That came from the UN as well, saying it was kind of like, well, we were kind of wrong about it. Notice how nobody quotes that UN report? Okay, so the UN is disgusting. many of its organizations, I don't want to, I know you hate broad generalizations, Mark. Many of its organizations are in bed with Hamas. They're in bed with all the worst actors in the world. The UN has no right to exist. Talk about, when you talk about the people who say Israel has no right to exist, the UN has no right to exist. It's a body full of malign actors that get lots of money to do nothing but bad things, okay? Nothing but wreak havoc and go against the West. Now, the situation in Gaza, what we need to talk about now, and aside from everything else, okay, so there's whether I agreed with humanitarian aid going in there or not. We're now in a situation where we had for several days an Israeli delegation in Doha, in Qatar, meeting with the mediators to reach with Hamas, to reach a hostage release deal with Hamas. And again, Hamas said no, even to the proposal by Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy.
Can I say on this point, because I'll allow you to continue in a moment, but I think it's not unconnected to what we've just gone through. Because there was talk, there was this vibe out there that Hamas was suddenly moderating its positions. And then nothing happened. And you can say, well, maybe the vibe was untrue. Or maybe when Hamas starts to hear there's all this pressure on Israel from Europe to stop, that the Canadians and the Brits and the French have all said Israel has to stop, we don't agree with this ground invasion. There was even reports out of Washington, which the administration denied, but quoting the president saying, well, this war has to stop and so forth, whether it's true or not. But what did Hamas interpret? If they were under a lot of pressure, military pressure, to maybe make concessions in the talks for a ceasefire and hostage release, which Israel is willing to do. But the minute they felt the pressure was off them because of everything that's coming out of Europe, if we just wait another week, Israel will be leashed in, yes, will be brought in and we'll have to compromise. Why? So actually, if Mr. Starmer and Mr. Carney and our lovely president of France, if they really wanted a ceasefire and the hostages out, they actually should have shut up. Because what they're actually doing is saying Hamas, no, it's not the right time to compromise. It's not the time right to being flexible. Time is on our side. In the end, the world will deliver everything we want because Israel won't be able to defeat us.
Look, you're absolutely right. All the people enabling Hamas should shut up. Now, what is interesting is even Adam Boehler, the envoy I attacked him from initially being the one who said, oh, let's talk to Hamas. They're actually nice guys. The Qataris are nice guys. Said all kinds of nonsense.
Did he actually say Hamas were nice guys?
Yeah, he said there are nice guys. No, he said the Qataris are good people. Hamas has nice guys, whatever. He said nonsense. But even he, in New York, at a conference just 2 days ago, whenever it was, he said, actually, the military pressure in Gaza has helped Hamas come to the table.
Correct, I heard him say that.
Even he said it, okay? Correct. And he's not somebody who's, normally I would want to quote. Even he said it. Now, we have a problem because and when we talked about this before, has Trump abandoned Israel? No, but you see, I said there was an agenda on the part of this marriage of the isolationist right-wingers in America and the far left in Israel and elsewhere, and the agenda was to place a wedge between Jerusalem and Washington. So you're absolutely right. Hamas sees that, believes the propaganda. It's not true. Anybody who knows that it's not any old denial from the Trump administration. There is not a rift between Washington and Jerusalem. It is true that we are critical of or nervous about some of Trump's recent deals, but there is no fight between us right now. Now, that brings us, by the way...
Can I just add one more thing?
Yes,
It needs to be said.
Yeah.
Israel put out a statement, very strong. The Prime Minister spoke against, as you said before, against what Canada, France, and Britain said. And after the British announced they're suspending the negotiations, I thought the foreign ministry put out a beautiful statement saying the mandate British occupation of our country ended 77 years ago, and that they should remember that they no longer are the colonial power telling us what to do. But more interesting, I thought, was Hamas put out a statement welcoming their decision. And I would think that people with a brain between their ears, yes, people who can think, in France, in Britain, in Canada, when you do something and Hamas comes out and praises you, surely that should cause you to think about what you've done.
It only causes you to think about what you've done if your thinking is, we really are pro-Israel, we really want Israel to win the war, but we've got to figure out a better way. No, you understand, that Hamas praised them doesn't bother them, Mark. That's you said
it should, though. It should.
It should, but this is why I'm against those leaders. Okay, this is exactly my point. Not against those countries. In those countries, there's a lot of opposition to that kind of ideology. Unfortunately, they're not leading. They didn't lead the country. And in Canada, I know Israelis and others, many Jews were saying, Carney won, we got to get out of here, okay? Because they were hoping for the conservative candidate to win, because not since Harper's being Prime Minister of Canada has there been real close relations with Canada.
Can I tell you a Harper story?
Okay.
I'll tell you, this is a few years back, I don't remember the year, but Harper came here as an official visit as the Prime Minister of Canada. And he came to Israel. He went to the West Bank to meet the Palestinians. He came back to Israel. And
Judea and Samaria, Mark.
Thank you. And he came back and he was asked some difficult questions about Israeli policy. And he answered the question by saying the following: it's interesting, when I was in Ramallah, no one asked me to criticize Palestinian policy. Why is it only when I'm in Jerusalem people ask me to criticize Israeli policy?
Well, absolutely, says, and I'll tell you something. It is like that old joke when there was the Soviet Union, during the Cold War, there was a joke about an American and a Russian meeting, and the American said, I live in a free country. We have free speech. I live in a free country, much better than yours. And he said, what are you talking about? I also live in a free country. The American said, really? I can stand on the White House lawn and scream, screw the President of the United States, and nothing will happen to me. And the Russian said, I can also stand in the lawn of the Kremlin and scream, screw the President of the United States, and nothing will happen to me. That's exactly what happens. And many Israeli groups, they'll have these peace groups, and what they are is Israelis and Palestinians both joining forces to criticize the Israeli government. Okay, now we really do have to talk about the bigger picture, the much bigger picture than Gaza. I mean, where it all comes from is Iran. Now, reports came out. It's very hard to say because these reports are unreliable, and they're also based on many anonymous sources, leaks from anonymous sources in Washington, et cetera. And according to these reports, mainly on CNN, but I think that's where it first started, that Israel is preparing to attack Iran, basically preparing to launch a strike on Iran. Now, what's funny about those reports is you need to have intelligence. Oh, and that these were leaks from Washington, that Washington got intelligence that Israel. So first of all, really, you need to be in the CIA or the Mossad to know that we've got to prepare in case we need to attack Iran. I mean, so I don't know what the operational plans are. But what we know now is there's been a whole big discussion about whether this is going to be the issue that breaks Prime Minister Netanyahu, whose whole career has been based on we've got to prevent Iran from nuclear weapons, and President Trump, who is trying to negotiate a deal to prevent the weapons. So here's the thing. It does sound, I have to just say, that the Ayatollah Khomeini has been tweeting a lot and also giving little speeches in Tehran about how Trump is a liar and that Iran is never going to stop enriching uranium. So, I say again, as I keep saying, it's getting to be time where Israel's going to have to attack Iran, and America does not have to join in the military of that. It just has to give backing or the right weapons. It does not have to also be involved in the physical strike.
So I want to tell you, I thought there was some good news this week on those issues, because the administration, the core issue in any deal with Iran is the issue of enrichment, because that's what Israel didn't like about the former nuclear deal, the one done by Obama, the JCPOA. And there were some indications early on that maybe the Trump administration would be willing to tolerate a certain level of enrichment. And for Israel, that's a major problem. Because if you can enrich a little bit, you use the same technology, you just run those centrifuges a bit longer and you get weapons grade, right? It's giving them the capacity to continue enrichment at a low level, gives them the capacity to build a nuclear bomb when they decide they want to do it. And I was most gratified on the Sunday talk shows to hear Steve Witkoff, who actually a few weeks ago said something that was problematic, said unequivocally, any deal will be no enrichment. And he's Trump's negotiator on this issue. And that made me feel, and you've said on this program before, you've said you don't think it's possible to reach a good deal with Iran. That could be true. That might not be true. But I was gratified to hear the Americans are publicly saying zero enrichment. That means that if there's a deal, it has to be a good deal.
Okay, so again, I will reiterate, the reason I say there is no such thing as a good deal with radical Islamist jihadists is that they lie. So first of all, you have to say, I am praying they won't agree to a deal, because no deal with those barbarians who have a political, religious ideology that leaves no room for compromise. You can't make deals with them. They break the deals. That's why I'm hoping they won't sign a deal, because it will be a bogus deal. Now, there's no way they're going to agree to not enriching uranium. So the question is, who in this chicken game is blinking first? I pray it is not President Trump. And that is why I hope it's being made very clear to him the insults that are being hurled at him from the Ayatollahs and from the president of Iran and from the foreign minister of Iran. Keep him informed that they are ridiculing him and insulting him, because Trump really doesn't like that. And if that helps him not be duped by those animals, all the better. Also, a lot of the problem is we talk a lot about nuclear weapons, and we haven't had a nuclear war. I think one of the things we forget is that conventional war is so awful. And, nuclear war isn't the only thing that kills you, as we've seen. And we see that from the most primitive kinds of warfare, like the Hamas massacre on October 7th, 2023. You can use knives and rocks and bombs and set people afire. You can commit a lot of damage. But also, look at all these high-powered ballistic missiles, surface-to-surface missiles, cruise missiles going all over the place. They are very, very deadly, even without nuclear warheads. Also, Iran isn't only enriching uranium, it's funding all the world's terrorism. So,
but let's be clear. Here, Israel has done the civilized world a service by taking on Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad and facilitating the changes in Syria. A lot of Iran's terror proxies are playing defense or are no longer there. And I think the whole non-nuclear part of the Iranian aggressive, posture has been hit hard, and they have taken a blow. Their ability, their terror proxy armies, they're bleeding. Not destroyed totally, all of them, but they're bleeding. They're in a difficult situation. I want to tell you something that makes me smile every time he does it. The president I'm talking about now, President Trump. He talks like, he spent most of his life in business, and he talks like a businessman. He said, I really don't understand why they need nuclear power for peaceful purposes. This is one of the countries with reserves of fossil fuels, of gas and oil like no other country. And so he's saying all these claims that Iran wants nuclear power doesn't stand up to logical criticism. No, he doesn't say that. He says he just doesn't understand it. But he reiterated in the last few days once again, either the Iranian nuclear program is dismantled through a deal, or, and he says he doesn't want to do it, or it will be done violently. And the question is how long, that's a fork in the road. How long is it before the Americans reach that fork? The Iranians have an interest in dragging it out as long as possible. We'll see.
No, they have an interest in dragging it out, as do Hamas. That is, and again, we have to get back to Europe. It is inexcusable for them to serve as Hamas enablers, encouragers, and they deny that, of course. All right. They say, we understand that October 7th was terrible, but what you've done since then is illegitimate. So what do they think is war? I've got to tell you something. That is really Europe since World War II. I got to say, and the French really have a nerve, okay, because, while they're on their vacances drinking their wine in the right glass, right? They let the United States protect them. They let Israel protect them, whatever. And what they don't realize, and this is the thing, they don't realize why a lot of populist right-wing groups are gaining. So far, they haven't gotten power in those countries, but they're gaining popularity is because they realize that the influx of immigrants who hate them, who want to take over and who want to commit jihad inside. That's why I said if they think they're not going to have an October 7th type of situation, they're kidding themselves. And that explains why in Holland also we have a lot of support for Geert Wilders, who won the popular vote, but then he couldn't form a coalition. The thing is that Europe has a lot of nerve to, it's all well and good for Europe to be pacifist in that way, or there's those labor parties, you say, when they're protected by people with the weapons.
I want to finish, because we've come to the end of our time. I want to finish with a comment about the Europeans. I said before that they're wrong because actually what they're doing isn't going to help achieve a ceasefire and hostage release. They're doing the very opposite, and I explained why their strategy is counterproductive. But I think also what Europe is doing is dangerous, and it is giving succor to our succor. Is that the way you pronounce the word?
Succor, yeah.
Succor.
That's how I pronounce it.
Yeah.
I don't know how you original Australians pronounce it.
Yes, to enemies of democracy, enemies of freedom, and I think they need to understand, and I think some do. But Israel's fight, we're not just fighting, obviously we're fighting for ourselves to protect our country, but we're fighting a larger battle here for humanity. And if heaven, it's not going to happen, yes, but if Hamas wins in Gaza, that's not just bad for Israel. That's bad for the Middle East. That's bad for Europe as well, and for the world. And I'd like to finish by saying the following. Europe can threaten. Europe can do more than threaten. They can take steps. But ultimately, from Israel's perspective, the only important thing is winning the war. And when we defeat Hamas and we get our hostages out, everything else will fall back into place. So we have a few months, maybe even longer, of a difficult time with Europe, where we're going to face criticism. We've got to grit our teeth and bear it, because ultimately, if we don't win this war, we're going to be in a much worse place than any other scenario. And it's a matter of prioritizing what we need to do. And the focus has to be winning the war. And if there be criticism from some people in Europe, so be it. That is secondary. We have to win the war.
Well, I was going to say, I couldn't have said it better myself, but it's true. Had I been the one to say it, I'm sure I would have said it with a lot more, let's say, adjectives than you did. But I wholeheartedly agree, yes.
And I will speak to you again next week, Ruthie.
Absolutely.